Cristin Colston, and I first want to say that I'm so greatly appreciative to have this opportunity to share my work, my thoughts, and ideas with all of you today. A big thank you goes out to all the faculty and staff that helped to lead, guide, and direct me to this point in time. My research and professional passions focus mainly on the military veteran population. I hope to one day work with veterans to improve the quality of life for those experiencing mental health issues, and I also want to be part of reducing criminological risk within this special population. United States military veterans are a special group of the population due to their unique lived experiences from their times in service. Military veterans put their lives on hold and endure incredibly stressful and oftentimes traumatic situations that can result in lifelong illnesses and disabilities. Many of these service-related afflictions, such as combat-related trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, substance abuse, and sexual trauma, have been identified as individual and interrelated risk factors of criminal behaviors that adversely affect the veteran population to be more likely to engage in criminal behavior and become entangled within the criminal justice system. A review of the literature shows that veterans have reported substance abuse, difficulty transitioning to civilian life, and economic disadvantage as the main contributing factors that cause them to become involved in the criminal justice system. Studies have found that many of these factors are often either caused or intensified by service-related trauma and trauma-related mental health issues. Subsequently, military veterans who are more likely to suffer trauma-related mental health problems will find that symptom severity and aggravation of symptomology are more relative factors that increase the likelihood to be arrested, have criminal charges brought against them, and be incarcerated, especially in respect to issues such as homelessness, substance abuse, and interpersonal and domestic violence. A recent preliminary assessment report issued by the Council on Criminal Justice found that military veterans as a special population are more likely than the whole of the general population to be arrested, and approximately 1/3 of veterans claim to have been arrested at least once. Military members have been found to be at higher risk to be arrested. However, it is possible that some findings that support higher criminal propensity may actually be due to a subset of individuals who don't really necessarily align with military culture and maybe serve their country for only a brief time frame. Other studies have shown that a subset of veterans with PTSD and negative emotionality may be at increased risk of criminal arrest. Veterans with mental health issues are not just more likely to experience arrest, but also more likely to experience subsequent criminal charges and incarceration, with severity and aggravation of symptomology being relative factors. Veteran arrestees are more likely to be arrested for a violent offense and are significantly more likely to report mental health problems. Other research has provided supportive evidence that PTSD and TBI are related to the risk of recidivism in respect to rearrests and parole revocations, as well as reconviction. That study also found that veteran offenders who were sentenced to segregation had a 148% higher risk of reincarceration. Though this could be linked to more violent behavior that extends past the prison environment and into free society, the findings still pose a significant concern. Incarcerated veterans make up about 8% of all United States inmates, with 1/4 of incarcerated veterans being identified as combat vets. While a majority are serving time for violent offenses, most are reported to have been discharged under honorable conditions. In comparison to non-veteran inmates, male veteran inmates in state prisons were twice as likely to be incarcerated for a violent sexual offense, to be serving a life or death sentence, and had experienced considerably longer sentencing lengths. Similar to state inmates, a larger portion of veteran inmates in federal prisons were serving time for violent sexual offenses in comparison to civilian inmates, but overall, they were more likely to be serving time for a property offense. Veteran inmates in federal prisons were also found to be serving longer sentences on average than their non-veteran counterparts. Interestingly, male veteran inmates were more likely to have only one arrest and were more likely to have had no prior incarcerations when compared to non-veteran inmates. Medicinal, psychological, and sociological research provides supportive evidence that veterans are overtly affected by trauma and strain to the extent that they are at risk for criminal coping and increased involvement with the criminal justice system. And with respect to previous research, the focus of my research is to employ Robert Agnew's general strain theory as a theoretical framework to understanding criminal behavior within the veteran population. Early perspectives on strain claim that crime occurs as the result of strain experienced by an individual who is unable to legitimately achieve financial success or attain highly valued societal goals. Robert Agnew expands on this theory of strain by proposing that individuals experience several different types of strain that cause negative emotionality and result in crime due to an individual's need or desire to correctively relieve the pressure of such strain through responsive coping mechanisms. Agnew's general strain theory asserts that strains are events or conditions that are disliked by an individual. Strains are also viewed as objective and subjective. General strain theory, as proposed on an individual level, argues that strains are most likely to cause crime when they are experienced or perceived as being high in magnitude or severity, viewed as being unjust or unfair, if they're combined with low levels of social control, and or if they're incentivizing to the pressure to cope criminally. Strains are believed to lead to negative emotionality, such as anger and frustration, that promote criminal coping behaviors. Chronic strains may further reduce an individual's ability to cope in legitimate ways and may cause exacerbation of emotionality in response to new or additional strains. Strains are also suggested to lower social controls and thus also increase the likelihood of criminal association and the social learning of crime. Agnew claims that coping with strain through crime is a way to reduce or escape strains, obtain revenge, and or alleviate negative emotions. From a general strain theory perspective, individuals engage in criminal coping behaviors when they lack the ability to cope through legitimate means, when they perceive the risks associated with criminal coping are low, and or if they're more disposed to respond with criminal action. Agnew further asserts that crime is more likely to occur when a person experiences two or more strains concurrently close together in time. Application of the theoretical lens of general strain theory brings greater understanding to military veterans experiencing strains associated with the transition to civilian life in combination with financial uncertainty, employment uncertainty, existing or worsening mental health issues, substance use, loss of camaraderie, and general confusion regarding VA benefit and healthcare resources. These strains can become risk factors that affect the veteran population to be more likely to engage in criminal coping, and thus they are at an increased risk for involvement with the criminal justice system. Well, PTSD and TBI in combination with anger issues might be specific to violent offending in the veteran population. Recent studies have provided support that financial instability and socioeconomic disadvantage increase the likelihood of criminal justice involvement in this special population as well. Additionally, a history of arrest, substance use, and antisociality are linked risk factors of justice-involved veterans, but several other factors related to legitimate and criminal coping mechanisms lack empirical study. Previous literature supports the idea that substance abuse is a form of escapism and that veteran populations, specifically those with trauma-related mental health disorders, have an increased likelihood to use substances in ways that promote or increase the likelihood of involvement with the criminal justice system. For example, veterans may be incentivized to cope with strain through criminal drug use or violence if they find treatment difficult to attain legitimately through VA services, or if they're predisposed to practices of substance abuse and violence through learned behavior while in service. Additionally, increases in negative emotionality and perceptions of unjustness, anger, and violence are linked to acts of revenge and the desire to alleviate such a negative emotional state. When tied to low social control and predispositions to criminal behaviors, these strains can increase the likelihood of criminal behavior exhibited by members of the veteran population who struggle with mental health strain or stressors. The veteran population has experienced strains uncommon to the civilian population, and they're especially susceptible to an increase in the likelihood of engaging in criminal behavior and becoming entangled with the criminal justice system. When considering the veteran population, it's important to remember that intelligence, problem-solving skills, financial resources, and levels of social support can all be negatively impacted by poor transitioning or service-related impairments, thereby increasing the likelihood of criminal coping. For a veteran, employment may be unsteady and emotional and societal bonds can be weakened due to such strain. Research utilizing general strain theory suggests that these occurrences can increase the likelihood of criminal coping. Additionally, other research suggests that due to experiences in the military, many veterans are predisposed to increased criminal behavior and criminal action responses when coping with strain as a result of military cultural and environmental influences that emphasize the use of violence and encourage soldiers to hide or suppress emotions. In regard to legitimate coping, one factor that sets military veterans apart from the general population is their access to VA benefits and VA health care, which from a general strain theory perspective arguably should be viewed and resourced as a mechanism of legitimate coping and a way to reduce criminal action. Existing research provides ample support that many forms of strain may contribute to criminological risk within the veteran population, and my current research seeks to use the voices of incarcerated veterans to better understand their perspective on the existence of strain, the use of legitimate or criminal coping mechanisms, and to what, if any, impact is military experience reported to have affected their lives or criminal justice involvement. In consideration of military veterans who are incarcerated, my research asks, what happened after military service? What types of strains or stressors do incarcerated military veterans report experiencing prior to their arrest? And how do military veterans perceive that their military experience affected their lives? The data used for this study is secondary and was originally collected by Dr. Melissa Stacer. Thank you so much, from here at the University of Southern Indiana. The data consisted of interview transcripts from semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions with qualitative responses. Participants of the study were all incarcerated males with the Department of Corrections of a Midwestern state, and they were identified as having previous military experience. Participation was voluntary, and those who agreed to participate were included. The sample consisted of 43 participants whose interviews were conducted in August and September of 2018. Included in the sample were 24 maximum security inmates, 8 medium security inmates, and 1 minimum security inmate that was housed at an outside unit in the maximum security prison. All the inmates were males, and a large majority of the participants were 40 years of age or older, and only 3 of the participants were reported to be under 30 years of age. Over 70% of the participants reported their race or ethnicity to be white, with about 20% reporting to be Black and the remaining participants reporting to be Hispanic. Over 50% of the participants reported to be divorced, and another 30% had never been married. More than 60% of the veteran inmates who participated were serving sentences that were 20 years in length or longer, and only 6 participants were serving sentences of 5 years or less. More than 60% of the offenses were either violent crimes or drug crimes, but 20% of the participants were incarcerated due to sex crimes involving children. In regard to military backgrounds, the majority of the participants were Army veterans in one form or another, and about 60% of all the participants had spent 4 years or more in service. While I do acknowledge that the sample does pose limitations to the research, I feel that the data conclusions drawn from the responses of these incarcerated individuals are extremely relative to initiating further important research to better understand criminological risk within the veteran population and to ultimately reduce the involvement of military veterans within the criminal justice system. I'm currently in the process of coding, and to be honest, I see a lot of the examples and factors related to strain in many of the interviews, and not strictly confined to the period of the time after service. With unsteady employment, financial issues, and interpersonal relationship issues being common factors of strain kind of jumping out at me right now. But most interestingly, I'm finding that all the veterans were discharged under honorable conditions, which entitles them to all available VA benefits. But from what the data present, VA benefits and resources have rarely been used, if at all. Based on what I see in the collected data at this point, in conjunction with previous research, I believe that policy reform should be aimed at already established efforts that focus on the initial point of transition, and I would advise administering a criminogenic risk perspective to the Department of Defense's Transition Assistance Program curriculum, also known as TAP. Outside of the differences in lived experiences, military veterans as a special population are also unique because they have available to them a myriad of services and resources dedicated to assisting each service member with the transition to and maintenance of civilian life. The Department of Defense and the VA provide reentry programs, education, healthcare, treatment, and compensation programs that veterans need, with the purpose of assisting them with building their lives up and putting them in a position to be on par with civilian members of society. Veterans have a plethora of available programs and resources dedicated to providing help, assistance, treatment, and compensation that were designed specifically for them. Appropriate action should be taken to efficiently pair needed resources with veterans to ensure positive transitions to civilian life in efforts to prevent criminal coping and also throughout their engagement with the criminal justice system as needed. While this reform does involve a multitude of people, my proposal would seek to utilize the already established TAP curriculum and its associated employees and pair it in combination to the work and research already established by the Council of Criminal Justice's Veterans Justice Commission. Adding a criminogenic risk perspective to the TAP program would influence the delivery of information provided in a way that brings awareness of criminogenic risk to the veteran and educates them on how to avoid these risks through the application and use of VA or community resources that are available to the veterans during and after transition to civilian life. Using theoretical criminological frameworks and empirically based research, the initial counseling and separation counseling portion of TAP can be used to flag criminogenic risk factors that can be addressed through further resource referrals and additional transitioning coursework provided across the TAP course timeline, to include financial planning, residential or housing planning, and employment planning and healthcare planning. My research should provide supportive evidence that veterans who are incarcerated did not utilize their VA benefits. And I believe that it is also important that we as a society should be investigating why and to what effect this underutilization has on communities. In conclusion, I want to thank everyone for their time, and I want to say thank you again to all the faculty and staff that have made my work possible. I could not have done this without all of you here at the University of Southern Indiana. Thank you and have a great day.